it goes back to that timeline of happiness for me, which is, and even that visualization, I have ideas and I really want to share them with other people. And writing is the vehicle to do that.
Welcome back to the 10,000 Heroes Show with your host, Ankur Shah Delight. The goal of this podcast is nothing short of the total evolution of society. So get settled. It might take a while. Our best guess at how to do that is through individuals, specifically helping each one of us align our external actions with our internal sense of mission and purpose, so we can gain energy every moment from that which we used to call work. And that, of course, is our definition of a hero. Or, to put it another way, a hero is someone for whom just being themselves is the biggest contribution they can make to the world. In this episode, I interview Alida Miranda Wolff. There's a lot that's impressive about Alida, from her career trajectory to her recent book to her art. But what I really love about her and this interview is her transparency about her own journey and her relationship with vision. Alida interacts daily and intentionally with her sense of vision and purpose. It wasn't until this conversation that I realized the degree of entitlement that many of us, including myself, have around vision, as if we just deserved to know our purpose in intimate detail, or a divine figure would reveal it to us fully formed. So here's the challenge. Take her advice and run the experiment, which is what Nate will probably do next week. And of course, we do something similar in Momentum Lab, our coaching program. But the important thing to me is not the specific actions or methodology, but rather that daily practice of keeping that vision alive and at the forefront of our consciousness. Every month, every week, every day, every moment. So, thank you, Alida. Thank you, cherished audience. And let's dive in. This podcast is about heroism. And my definition of heroism is people living up to their own highest potential, to be themselves and to contribute. So part of that conversation is there's always a part about purpose, and there's always a part about vision, because those are really important things to living up to our potential. So when I heard you on this other podcast talk about the launch of Ethos, and you had such a clear plan of exactly everything you had to do before it launched, and then such, to me, what seemed like a really successful launch of, 137 meetings on the calendar in the first month. I was like, oh, this person knows something about vision. What is your intention with that project? And what is your vision for the impact you want to see that have on the world?
It's evolving every day. And part of that is that I am currently on leave. So I have more time to think and not be in the execution and details of running a business and being a diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging practitioner at the same time. And part of it is just that I've had a really evolutionary year. I've said 2022 and part of 2021 has been the year of the 3 Bs: business, book, baby. So the business ethos has grown so much. We went from 6 people to 15 people. We went from being a 6-figure business to a 7-figure business. We went to having under 100 clients to well over 100 clients, all in about a 4-month period. And the business has been around for 4 years. So this is part of that evolution. And I can talk a little bit about where that is coming from in terms of my evolving thoughts on the ethics of running any kind of social impact business. The book has been my dream since probably I was 5 or 6 years old. I didn't necessarily think it was going to be about belonging or about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, although it's not that far off. When I was in 6th grade and I was asked what I wanted to do with my life, I said I wanted to be the head of a psychiatric ward because I wanted to heal harm in those who were experiencing mental illness and mental disability. So there's been a through line.
Yeah, so kind of corporate America is your psych ward. Is that?
In some ways, it's really about the access to people in a space that I understand how to provide some relief in. And everybody has a different space where they can serve or be in service. And so the book came about and was tied to really 2 visions at once, which I will talk about. And then the baby, my son, in many ways, is my dream. And that is a very strange thing for me to say, Ankur, because I was somebody who said I never wanted to have children for most of my life. And that was because of the trauma I experienced as a child. And also a lot of my fear and anxiety about the world and what it means to bring a child into this world, especially this world, not only in the United States, but of course in the United States.
Yeah.
So with that in mind, it goes back to this idea of vision. I've talked about succinctly what my vision for myself is. And I think that's important in understanding the vision for the business, because my vision for myself is to teach love, heal harm, and scale belonging. And when I started the vision, I didn't say it like that, but I had this intention of this vision for myself, which became the vision for Ethos. Because when I started the business, there wasn't a separation between the two, a place of major change. That's where the last 2 years have been really instrumental for evolving my sense of self and my sense of the business as something that is outside of me as opposed to an extension of me. And really what Ethos is meant to be now is a place where many people can come together to help folks from historically resilient communities, often what we refer to as underrepresented and underserved groups, to provide them with opportunity within the organizations they serve. I don't think that this is the be all, end all, change the world, but I think the institutions we work in are broken and we don't have another option at this time. And so how do we create the space and the care and the opportunity and the equity to allow for, at the very least, something better every single day?
Beautiful. Okay. I want to riff off that a little bit. So you said teach love, heal harm, and scale belonging. And that's something, I can just relate to so much of what you said, from not wanting to have a kid, because I never wanted to have a kid, to having that kid be a kind of dream come true that I never knew I had, to these three things of how I also want to go about the world. And personally, until very recently, had almost no idea about how I could do it outside of just my daily life interactions with people. And so going back to and this may or may not be true that you're this expert on vision, but I just want you to play that role right now because that's how I see you. So you have that idea of teaching love, healing harm, and scaling belonging. There's many ways one could do that. How did you end up doing what you're doing as a strategy of achieving that goal? And at what level of detail are you imagining it in order to make it happen? That makes sense?
It does. When I was 24, I started teaching a class at a local school for adult learners in the evenings. And it was a class that I designed, and it was called Design Your Dream Job. And it was different from other career coaching classes because what I had people do was write a vision statement for themselves in the same way that we might for a company, for a business. And so I would have folks reflect on their why, their how, and their what. And I've spent years now doing that for myself. And I've shared what my why is, and that's my reason for being, my broader intention, the thing that I don't think will ever be complete. And you're right, the how is the next part. How do you do that in your specific way? There are many, many ways to teach love. And for me, that's part of why this sort of model or approach to vision is successful, because I don't feel trapped. I don't feel locked into something. Ethos doesn't have to be everything to me, because I could move on from ethos, and maybe teaching love is by using my skills to support those who've experienced domestic abuse. Or maybe teaching love is actually going back and being a teacher, which is something that I've done on and off for the last decade. The point being, I can go back and forth, but my how is what I reflect on the most every single year.
Yeah, because the how can change and still satisfy the end goal, the why. It can still satisfy the why.
Exactly. And the what is the tangible, what am I doing right now? So to give you a sense, the how is my values, the way that I want to do those things. So how do I want to teach love, heal harm, scale belonging? For me, it starts with always learning, coming from a place of humility, starting with why, always going back to the broader purpose, the broader meaning, seeing the genius in other people. So, understanding the importance of coalition and community and being in service. There are some ways in which I'm very Catholic. I don't talk about my religious identity very often. And there are many ways in which the institution of the church does not cohere with what I do. However, I was raised on the idea of good works, and that is sort of my moral compass. What do I do in service of others? So I think about an inner church versus an outer church, if that makes sense. And then the what is, what do I feel called to do right now that satisfies this vision and that I can operate in according to these values? And so when I think about that, that's part of how ethos expanded. Because if my why is to teach love and heal harm and scale belonging, and I want to do it by learning from others, well, I really can't run the business alone, can I? And I ran the business alone for 2 years. And that's when I decided, from an ethical standpoint,
It didn't match with your values about learning from the genius in others.
exactly. And that's part of why I also made the decision with the team that I had put in place, those 6 people, to say, you know what, we really need to be 15. And then when we talk about the book launch and the book promotion, I was really clear with my publicist that I wanted my publicist to work with our VP in the organization to also make sure their voice was platformed, and that I want to create a platform for others in the organization. And even some of the language I'm using in this podcast, historically resilient communities isn't mine, it comes from my team. And that's something that's really important to me now. And so it manifests in the what, which is a larger team. Whereas if you had asked me when I started Ethos, I would have said I never want to have more than a few people around me. I want my firm to be a boutique firm, and scale for me isn't about size. And the reality is it's not about size for the same reasons it might be for other people who expand their teams. For me, it's about always learning. It's about seeing the genius in others. It's also about being in service. One thing that I found that I think was actually pretty disordered, if I can be vulnerable in that way, is I was treating my clients like my home base or almost like a family unit. And that's not appropriate for that kind of relationship, especially because the reason you're brought into a company is because of your outside view. If you become a member, you don't provide that service that you're supposed to provide. And I was searching for something there that really needed to be happening in the organization that I was part of, which is that community of partners and thinkers and people who I could share some of my challenges with. Now, that's not all of my challenges. It is a place, though, where I can grow. And that's not to say that I don't grow with my clients, but it's in a different way. I'm not asking them to grow me in the way that I grow them. There's more reciprocity, more mutuality when it happens on a team. So it serves this bigger vision and also my own individual need.
Yeah. So you at the beginning, when you started the business, you were more vulnerable perhaps with the clients, or just there were many more threads to the way you were relating to them. And you're like, oh, these represent real needs I have for a certain type of connection, but it's more appropriate to have them with people more in my organization. Did I get that?
Absolutely. It goes back to this idea that comes up a lot if you're pursuing higher education in social work or in psychology, which is self-disclosure can be a valuable tool if it does not get used as a means of satisfying your own individual needs. So I can tell you a story I can share with you, but it's in service of our practice together. If I'm your coach and I'm having the worst day of my life and experiencing unprocessed grief, I shouldn't be asking you as the person I coach to process that grief with me. If in a few months or years I share that moment with you because you're going through something similar and you need something illustrative, it's at my discretion, depending on my practice, depending on the approach that I use, if I bring that in or not. And that's where the line was blurred. And I can say that there was one client in particular, which is where I had all of my hardest learnings. And I almost worked there full time. So there was always a blur. And some of my closest friends came from that organization. It was just too much of a dual relationship for it to be healthy. But I had one of the worst days of my life when I was working there. And I should have gone home, and I didn't. I went to their Halloween party. And at that Halloween party, by sheer accident and misfortune, I fell down the stairs, hit my head, was bleeding from my face, had a concussion. And then there were sort of people making jokes about the fact that I had a little too much to drink, which actually wasn't the case. What they were seeing was somebody melting down. I almost wish it had been a situation where I had had too much to drink. And I sat down on the steps, and it was like 2 a.m. And one of my very close friends who worked there was next to me being like, Alida, we need to get you home. And I was like, no, I need to redeem myself. I need to clear my name. Like, I need to fix it. And she's sitting there next to me, and she's like, no, this is bad. You're bleeding from your face. This doesn't look good. You won't want this. And then I just broke down sobbing, and I told her what had happened, which was it was a personal tragedy, basically. And she said, why didn't you tell me before we came to this Halloween party? This doesn't matter. If you needed to be with people, it could have been me and your husband. It could have been your family. Why did you come here? And it was because that was the place that I associated with safety and security and support, which I think a lot of people do with companies because you spend so much time there. It's second nature to go there when things are maybe not going so well. It was not the best decision I made, and I learned a very painful lesson from it. It was something that I'm glad happened, though, now, because at the time I experienced a massive amount of shame, which is part of why I read books like Cringeworthy and So You've Been Publicly Shamed, and started doing a whole lot of not Brene Brown shame research, because I was not ready to accept myself. I wanted to know, what is shame and how do you come back from it? But the lesson that I learned there was not to let my individual wants go unattended so long that they become needs that I subconsciously or unconsciously seek out, instead of taking a proactive approach to and working through my own cycle too. And it led to me setting much better boundaries with clients and, frankly, doing better work.
Okay. But what I hear thank you for sharing that. I mean, that sounds horrible, even to imagine it now. And this like kind of macabre irony that you're bleeding during a Halloween party. So maybe some people thought it was your costume. But so now you've managed to separate that a little bit, and you have this community at work, and you're able to like learn from these people and get some of these needs met. I'm just wondering, at the next level, is there also a structure of people and relationships that is outside of your company or any kind of work relationship that you can go to?
Absolutely. That was another part of this. So I will say, first of all, for anyone who's doing care work, which is what I consider DEIB work to be, but I consider a whole lot of other things to be care work too. For anyone doing care work where you're both doing the emotional work, so you have to police your own affect in order to do the job, but you're also literally taking care of other people, I say the surgeon model is the necessary model, which means you need a team of people around you who exist there to support and care for you, because you have to suspend your needs and not get the care that you need all day, every day when you're in this practice. You think about an emergency room nurse. there's not an opportunity for her to run to the bathroom if she needs to, if someone is hemorrhaging on the table. She can't do that. Well, that happens for people who hold space so many times a day. So when I have people break into DEIB, I say I highly recommend, if it's not a therapist, it's a coach, it's a community leader, a spiritual leader, but literally someone you pay who you have routine appointments with to talk to and help you. And you should have a friend circle, and you should have your chosen family circle, whether that's biological or not. But having people around you who actually do work for you the way that you work for other people, so that you know that you will have someone to provide relief that is guilt-free. Because when you become a care worker, what happens, I see it all the time, I've done it myself, is you actually tell people in your life less about what's going on with you, because now you understand the burden of carrying someone else's weight. And so you might be less willing or less able to put that on your partner. And so for me, I have my meditation coach, I have my therapist, and I've had a variety of coaches, teachers, etc., who I've surrounded myself with to provide necessary support, especially for processing secondary trauma that I experience when I'm working with other people. And then there's the idea of a support circle of people that you love. And I will give Ariana Taboda a shout out here. She wrote a book called The Expecting Entrepreneur, but what I want to call out about it is there's an exercise that she learned from her social work practice that she shares there that I use with my coaching clients. I keep a very small number. I don't do a whole lot of coaching anymore, but I was a coach for 10 years, so it shows up in my practice. And the idea is you draw 3 circles. And the first circle are the people that you would trust with anything. 100%, these are the people you go to ask for help. These are the people who can see you without a performance. They see you at your best. They see you at your lowest. The next circle is all of the people who you think could get there but aren't yet, that you would need to invest more time in those relationships, that you would need to build more of a sense of community with in order to get them into that first circle. And then there's the third circle. And the third circle is all of the people who you spend a whole lot of time with and create a sense of chaos or distress or insecurity. The relationships are actually the opposite of supportive because they're fraught. And the first time I did that exercise, one of the things that stood out to me was that the majority of my relationships were in the outer circle. So I had people, I really did. And that was part of why I didn't pay attention to the fact that I needed support, because I had a lot of people. I didn't feel lonely. I didn't feel isolated. I had a lot of people who we were in what I call 80-20 relationships, where either I give you 80% and you give me 20%, or vice versa. You know, you're my best friend and I lay everything on you and you take it, but I'm not necessarily doing the same thing for you. And so I needed to really think about that middle circle and, of course, my inner circle and determine what that was going to look like. And where the revelation came for me was I was in an entrepreneurs group, and there were a lot of reasons it didn't totally work for me, but there was an element that worked really well, which is every single month we would meet for 4 hours to process what we were going through leading our businesses.
Wow. At a time.
Yes, 4 hours, 5 people. And we had to share what was on our mind and basically rate different elements of our life. So work, family, health. And I was sharing in one of our sessions, and someone who I'd not gotten along with previously, because we just could not seem to get each other. We were always missing each other in conversation, said, Alida, I need you to pause for a second. Can we just for a moment count the number of people that you're taking care of right now? And I said, well, that's kind of hard. I mean, how do we define it? So we spent a little bit of time defining care. And then I tried to give a conservative estimate, and the number we came up with was 33. And then he asked me, who is taking care of you? And I named one person. And he said, see, to me, that's where all of the stuff coming up in health and family and work is coming from. Who's taking care of you? And what happens when that one person isn't around, either temporarily or not temporarily? And so I started an organization called Embolden, which celebrates the power specifically of friendships between those who identify as women or femme, just for the purpose of the friendship. It's not a networking group. It's not a business group. And because it was so hard for me to be in these give and take relationships, that's been part of my own journey, it was built around the idea of a reciprocity ring, where you have a group of people, often who don't know each other, who share the one thing they want most in the world. And then it is members of that group's responsibility to fulfill it. And it's not the people that you give something to, because the idea is the group as a collective holds each other up. So when I say what I really need is to find a good therapist, the person I'm helping with their business plan isn't the person recommending that therapist to me. It's somebody else. And that's how I started to build a support circle of friends where, at least to me, the idea was I don't have to constantly earn your love. I don't constantly have to prove myself. I don't constantly have to do acts of service for you. We can just be, and there can still be activity to it, which better aligns with the way that I am and operate, and leads to good and leads to support in a perhaps pure way, because this is a space where the things that you want aren't judged.
Wow. If I understand this right, you created a structure in order to get strangers to become friends and really show up and support each other in a way that's protected from your kind of constant desire to serve. It's like almost like a service-free or like a reduced service space to give yourself permission that, like, in these relationships, that's not going to be part of the dynamic.
That's right.
Wow. And they were strangers to start with.
Originally, when it started, I knew everyone because I got them all together, but they didn't know each other. But then they started bringing people. That was actually my first ask, which was to bring people that I didn't know that they thought would benefit from the group. And we would meet quarterly, and the group got bigger and bigger. Before COVID, it was in February of 2020, our last live event, we were supposed to have 35 people. That's about the number that I thought was the max we could do and still go around the circle and do our sharing and volunteering. We had 74 people come. We totally violated fire yoga studio that we were in. And people were shoulder to shoulder as we did sound healing as kind of our opening activity before we did our circle. And I knew maybe half the people in the room. And so you can see it starts to snowball, and people bring in others who they've never really thought of in this way, bring them into the space. And there you are, you have a group of people, and you may develop relationships with them. And I can say that there are people who participated in Embolden who I fully expected I would have deeper relationships with as a result. And there were people I never thought that would be the case with. In 2020, also in February of 2020, I went on the first trip I've ever gone on with non-family members. So with two friends. It's just, I'm 29 years old. I've never done that before. And one of them is someone who I would have said, yeah, that makes sense that we would go on a trip together. And the other person was someone I had tangentially known through work, who wanted to be part of our small groups of 5 people who would have basically facilitation questions and meet every 4 to 6 weeks. And we just really connected. And we went through, and the 3 of us went to Sedona together and had a really different kind of experience while we were there. And it was a place where, truthfully, these are 2 people I knew from work. I would have never let people from work see me in the ways that I showed up there, but I did because the idea was this is not for my business. This is not to grow my business. This is not to put a good word in for me or we make money together. And so you're going to have to see me in a way that maybe I don't really like to show up. And that is, I have always been rewarded in a professional context more than in any other context. I have been successful quickly. And one of the reasons for that is I've been described as someone who has it together, no matter how much adversity or challenge or struggle. I always have a plan. I always have a solution. I'm pretty even tempered. I can work myself out of a mess and I can do the same thing for other people. And there are some elements of that that are true, and there are strengths that I have that allow for that to be possible. And there's a lot of that that is performance and a coping strategy and a way to actually build the thing that I want to build, even if it means suppressing other things that are going on for me. And so to be in this space and not be together, to be messy, for me, who gets to see messy is a very, very, very big choice. And there's a lot of thought and intention behind it because it's not just about what I'm trying to protect them from. It's about what I'm trying to protect myself from. You know, the root word for vulnerable comes from the Latin, which means to wound. When you are vulnerable, you are giving people the opportunity to hurt you. You have to really trust that they won't, or that it would be worth it if they did.
Right. Wow. This idea or ideas like it is so kind of ripe. I mean, I meet so many people who have moved to a new area or for whatever reasons from their culture or their childhood just don't have adult friends and are just hungry for ways to connect with people and looking for something. They're kind of over the artifice of it has to be natural. And they're just like, just give me a structure where I can meet some people and care about them. And it's such a beautiful way where all you know about someone is what they need the most. So earlier you mentioned about your baby, your son. And before this call, I wanted, again, on this kind of vision theme, I wanted to ask you almost like a little retrospective. I wanted to ask Alida from a year ago what she thought having a baby would be like, because you've had a baby for just a few weeks now, right? And then to check in with Alida from now about what having a baby is like and see if there's any difference between those answers.
Well, first of all, I have to say that Alida from a year ago anticipated that having a baby would be really hard, physically, emotionally, and also in terms of life change. And so one thing that I say and have said a number of times is if it wasn't for the team that I have now, especially a few of the members of the leadership team, Lisa Tamiko Blackburn, Sunny Conway, Karen Oates, I wouldn't have had a baby because the business took up too much. And I had previously taken a vacation of 5 days to see my godparents for the first time in 15 years in Spain. And while I was gone for those 5 days, my business basically imploded. And so I'd learned this lesson of I can never step away. I can never, ever leave things up to other people. And so having that core team, I started to allow myself to consider, is it time? COVID was in some strange ways really good for me. And it was good for my marriage and good for my husband and me to figure out what it was that we wanted from having a family. Because we had our doubts and our reservations for different reasons. In many ways, the same reasons, which is the state of our world. But my husband is an environmental activist and specifically looking at climate change and the Green New Deal. And then I work on issues of social identity and activism when it comes to especially gender and disability. So we had to confront these ideas and we had to decide, is this something we wanted? Where is it coming from? Is it coming from external social pressure? If it's coming from an internal drive, what is that drive? And this moment of sort of worldwide chaos made us talk about these things without having the same, well, I need to be here and you need to be here and I need to be here and you need to be here, because we were always doing so many things all the time. And even though we both were extremely busy during COVID and continue to be, we were in the same space. So there was this idea, having a child was something that we both really wanted. I wanted one, even though I didn't think I could have. I have a number of chronic illnesses, and that's part of where my disability activism comes from. So I didn't think I could have a child. There was a desire to feel rooted and to have roots, which I've never had. And moving from what I've called the meaning and purpose phase of my life to the grounding and rooting phase of my life, there was the sense of wanting to create in a different way and wanting to learn in a different way, but also this sort of hard to describe impulse where being able to say, well, why did you want to have a child, is both easy and hard at the same time, because the answer is love. And that's not so easy to define. But I would say now that I have a baby, there are a few things that come up for me. In some ways, I really predicted how things were going to go. There were people in my life who were like, Alida, why are you being so negative? Why are you doing all this disaster planning? And I
said, baby disaster planning. I love it.
Why are you doing this? Like, what if your baby doesn't cry? What if you don't have a hard pregnancy? What if you don't have a difficult delivery experience? And I said, I don't want any of those things to happen. My hope is that I never have to use any of these plans I'm putting in place. But I stocked up on formula before the formula shortage started, right? I thinking, what if this is a contingency? Because one of the things that I realized is I had a really difficult pregnancy, really, really, really difficult pregnancy. I went to the emergency room 3 times during my pregnancy, and I was in labor for 5 days. So I actually, in some ways, gave birth 2 ways, because my baby was actually in the birth canal. So I was giving birth that way. And because of a lot of challenges and complications with that delivery and the fact that my water had broken, we had to do a C-section. So I had to actually heal from both kinds, which is interesting. And my C-section was supposed to be really fast and routine, and they said it's going to be about half an hour, and I was on the table for 2.5 hours. I had an obstetrical hemorrhage. I lost 30% of my blood in under 2 minutes. And one of the nurses there had said to my husband, if this was 30 years ago, you would have had to choose. Because both the baby and I were going through critical circumstances. He had stopped breathing, and I had gone into shock from blood loss. So I had done all of this disaster planning, and I was right to do it. And what I didn't prepare for, and what is different, is all of the ways in which he is a dream. He was a dream for me before because it was something I didn't think I could do. It was something I didn't think I could have. And now it's a lot less about that. It's a lot more about he's alive and I made him. And he does inspire awe. And I know all parents say that when this happens, but he inspires. And there's something my husband says a lot as things continue to darken and worsen in the world. He says, I know the world is better for having him in it. And that is true. And there's a song off of Chance the Rapper's first major album, with Dram, and the lyrics go something like, everyone is special, this I know is true when I look at you. So you are special, and because you are special, I can see what is special in everyone else. And that has been true. There is a greater amount of compassion. And then there's also some healing that takes place in having a child, because there are perspectives I can adopt that I couldn't adopt before. But there are also ways in which I can see how some of the struggles or adversity I've experienced serves me. So, for one, I have a baby who definitely cries more than 3 hours a day. And he was born premature and has had a lot of gastrointestinal distress. And things are getting better. And we have gotten to a place that's much, much, much healthier for him. But even in his first 4 days, he lost so much weight, so much more than the average baby loses a week out, that we had to go to the pediatrician every other day and supplement with formula and do all of these tests. And we thought he had a rare genetic disease. I mean, there was so much going on. But one thing that strikes me is, I've had people say, oh, yeah, I know what it's like. It's so hard to have a colicky baby. I understand why someone would shake a baby, even though I would never do that, but I've felt that way. And I've just not been angry at him. But the reason I haven't been angry with him is because I've had 10 long years of serious chronic stomach issues that I've been to the hospital for, that I've had medications for, that I've seen doctors for. So there's this sort of element of empathy and connection where I'm like, oh, you're just so uncomfortable. What can I do to soothe you right now? Not, I do need space, and I don't want to by any means say that I don't, but there is an element of just being able to see somebody in that level of distress and experience both emotional empathy and compassionate empathy, but also because I've experienced that pain, I think I can withstand the crying a little bit better. I've noticed different people have different reactions to baby crying, and it definitely sets me off and is unnerving. But I can just sit with him while he's crying for an hour or 2 hours and know that really at this point, if I have done everything I can do, all I can do is be there because I've been in that situation.
Wow. That's definitely my kryptonite. I can't stand that. Other people's kids are fine, but my own baby crying, I was just like, I can't. I need to leave. But there's something that really resonated with me and also really confuses me, which is that when you see a baby, you're like, oh, I get it. We're all special. We're all beautiful. And now it's like, you have this visceral understanding that every single person that I run across, whether it's the person with the bumper sticker I despise or whatever, just the random person at the hardware store, they're all just beautiful, precious, unique babies. Why doesn't that feeling stay? There's most people are parents, that most adults are parents. I don't get the sense that that feeling is really permeated and stayed with everyone in our society, or even me. I have that at moments, but then there's moments where I'm just I get angry and dismissive of others.
Well, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. There's a lot of complexity to our own emotional experiences and how we relate to people. We have hardwired threat responses from a psychological standpoint that come up. So when we see difference, especially difference that's threatening to us in some way, we're going to experience fear. It's going to trigger a stress response. I think that, and I'm totally blanking on who said it, but it came out of the book, So You've Been Publicly Shamed. And the idea that came up there is almost every act of violence that you can see starts with fear or shame in some way. And that is something that other people make us feel. We're not living in a perfect utopic commune. We are living in a world of people who have different views, who are coming from different places in terms of what they believe, in terms of what they feel, in terms of how they express themselves. We all have our own bags that we carry from place to place. And what I mean when I look at him and when I think about people in the world is there is something inherently beautiful about life or existence. You are a life, you are a breath, and you are also potential. This comes from an evolution in my thinking. I used to be very interested in specifically Camusian existentialism, which is more positive than, let's say, Nietzsche. But I still was an existentialist of thinking about, well, it's about the act of pushing the rock, not about the outcome, because this is the cards we're dealt with. And I've evolved to believe that we are not necessarily our behaviors and actions. There's always another day, there's always another moment, there's always another choice. And so that was something that came from my work and my practice, because I've been asked the same question, Ankur, by people on my team and by my clients, is like, how can you deal with this person? How can you approach this situation? I've had people attack me. I've had people physically attack me. In 2019, I was attacked 3 separate times by strange men in the street in the middle of the day. It was a very bizarre occurrence that it happened so much. But I've also had people post things online. I've had people in training sessions. I mean, especially.
Yeah, you work in diversity. I'm sure you're triggering a lot of people.
Since Trump took office, 2 people have felt more empowered to say things. They felt them before. I'm 100% certain of it. But they felt like they could say those things. And in those situations, I've often approached those people not by being defensive, but by saying, what's coming up for you? What's driving this right now? What's happening? And this sort of shows up with my baby all the time, because he'll cry and cry and cry. And then I'll pick him up and he'll just stop crying. And I'll say, was that all it was, that you wanted someone to pick you up? And I could be frustrated, but then I think about it and I'm like, well, if I had known that was an option, I would have had the same reaction as you. And there are many times when I think it would have been nice to scream cry like that. And that's what other people are holding too. I can't know everybody's story. I can't know their interior life. I can't know their circumstances. All I can know is that they're breathing, that they're living, that they're here. And there is something inherently beautiful in that, especially there's the beauty of a potential connection that could always come, that could always exist, even if it doesn't in this moment.
I want to tie that beauty of just each individual being back to what we started with a few minutes ago about the why. It's the why, the how, and the what. And there's many exercises to go through some version of that. So assuming someone has done that, do you have a practice? I mean, you seem like you're able to keep that really at the forefront and kind of not straight. Is there like a daily practice of checking in with that, or what does that look like for you? Or
I have many practices and they stack up into timeframes. So every single year, I set my core desired feelings, and I've adopted this from the work of Danielle Laporte and the desire map. There are a lot of things I like about it, and like with any other framework or tool set, you'll need to customize to you and your needs and your preferences. And so what I do is every single year, I go through a pretty extensive process. So 2 to 3 days of thinking and journaling and reflecting, where I go through my actual physical calendar and I look at everything I've done and I ask myself what truly helped me live the core desired feelings I set for that year, whether I enjoyed it, whether I didn't enjoy it, and what I would say hell yes to again, and what I really have to eliminate, basically a do not do list. And then I also go through what were the 5 goals I set for the year, my version of New Year's resolutions. And did I achieve them, and how did I feel when I achieved them? Everybody knows what it's like to set a big goal and then not feel great when it's done. Not just runner's blues, but maybe the goal itself was a distraction from something else that needed to have your attention. And then I start brainstorming how I want to feel. And it's been really interesting to chart the feelings that I set over time and how they map to that greater vision statement because you can see evolution. I remember my best friend telling me about my 2018 feelings, that they were really external. They were really about how I wanted other people to see me. And that was actually when I was becoming a public speaker professionally, which I hadn't been before. But also, I was 25. I turned 25 and I was figuring out what kind of citizen in the world I wanted to be. And I was also dealing with a lot of insecurity and needing approval and validation. So a lot of the emotions I chose were really
that shows up in the goals.
And then in 2020, when I was sharing them with her, she was like, these are really internal. Like, these are things that maybe other people wouldn't even notice if you had achieved them. They come from a place of sort of interiority. And 2020 was a time of really retreating into myself and figuring out, okay, I've been on this achievement orientation for a really long time. Is it still serving me? Do I define achievement? And most importantly, the question I was asking in 2020 is, who is this all for? And do they matter to me? And so I go through that process and it's really intensive. And then what I do is I use those feelings. So I have 4 this year. I want to feel, actually have 5 this year. I had 4 last year. But this year I wanted to feel at ease, flourishing, inventive, confident, and blessed. And they've shown up for me in really different ways than I would have ever expected. But that's where the next part comes in. So every quarter, I essentially build a roadmap for the next 13 weeks. I use the best self journal, but I, again, retool the categories in it a little bit, since some of the things that it focuses on are just, they don't speak to me in the same way, but I like the 13-week structure. And I write out my core desired feelings and my goals every single day in the sort of notes part of that planner. But I use that to set my bucket list and my 3 major goals. And those goals have to ladder up to my 5 for the year. So one of my goals for this year was to become a published author, which I did in February. But I have added layers to it because what kind of published author I want to be. And so that planner helps me stick to that, even during a time where my book was published in February. What do I do with that? But there's a lot. So I went and I signed copies of that book at the Seminary Co-op, which has been my bookstore for 10 years, right? And that was something meaningful to me. That was a fulfillment of a dream, fulfillment of purpose, but also getting to share a part of myself with a space that helped shape me, right? And so it starts to take that. And then on a weekly level, I have my habit tracker where I check the habits that help me realize my goals and, again, how I'm feeling. And I also have where I look at the progress I'm making towards those 3 goals. And I ask myself sort of what happened this week, what worked, what could be improved. And then I log what were the best things that happened this week. And I just pay attention because it's in that information that I'll see if my goals are even the right ones or if they need to be revised. What I was doing earlier today, one of the things I've been doing during my leave is I wrote a bucket list, like a true bucket list, 100 items where I'm journaling about them as I achieved them in 2017. And I decided I was going to read the entire thing and determine which of these do I just not want to do. So I made like a kill, keep, combine list. And I found some things. One, I had done 30 of them in the last 5 years. So are those really bucket list items? Am I just really prioritizing the right things? Am I not setting my aspirations high enough? And it was actually a combination of the two. One of the things that I learned was I set a lot of things in that bucket list that were tied to my vision. So even without thinking about them, I sort of did them, which was kind of amazing to see because I'd forgotten some of the things on there and then realized, oh, wow, I did have an art show and it did mean these things to me. And now I have to write about it. But there were 41 items that I did not want to do. And so I eliminated all of them. And I've spent the last basically week just thinking and brainstorming and writing lists of what would help me. And I have a vision board that's up on my wall where I'm looking at it. And I had sort of made themes and categories. and said, okay, well, what would actually help me get closer to this? And again, who is it for? Why do I want it? And then on the daily level, in addition to looking at my goals, my core desired feelings, I asked, what would make today a good day for me? And I sort of make that list. And then I review that and ask myself, was that true? And it starts to give me, again, more information about that. And so it's a process, right? I'm doing a lot of things step by step by step, but it's sort of a lesson I learned with my book. A lot of people asked me about it, and it was a really stressful experience writing my book. There were a lot of changing deadlines with my publisher. It also had to be written during the busiest time in my business's history, where I was working like 60 hours a week because we just didn't have enough people to do the amount of work that was needed. Anyway, I ended up having to write my book in 6 weeks, which I did. And people were like, oh my God, you must be so incredible that you did that. And I said, if you look at my cabinet in my office, you're going to see 8 journals. And in every single one are all of the notes from every book that I've read, from every project that I've done, from every article that I've done, because I keep research journals and they're dated. So I can go back to 2016. I can go to January 2020 through January 2021. When I wrote my book, I didn't have to do research because I'd been doing research.
Yeah, you had set yourself up for success.
And you were asking about being a vision expert. I'm definitely not an expert on having a vision, but I can say that I have a lot of tools and practices that help making a vision happen and feeling aligned to mine easier. And that's where I'll just share my last thing related to vision, which I think is helpful, because I've talked about core desired feelings. I've talked about the best self planner, just tools that can be used. But the last piece that I think has been helpful is I do use visualization exercises. And I was on a meditation retreat in very early 2018 where for my certification, because I am a certified mindfulness and meditation coach, I don't do it professionally. I just wanted to do an intensive program, and you can't do one without getting a certification. So I did. But I went through it, and Daryl Jones, who is a practitioner who wrote a book and who also works with Chill Anywhere, which is an online meditation platform, led us through a meditation where basically we had to visualize ourselves. So we had to, drop into our breath, close our eyes, visualize ourselves. And we had to start by realizing if all of our hopes were realized, what would we see? And the first time I did that exercise, I saw myself on a stage and I was giving light to a crowd of people. So that was the image that I saw, myself on a stage, a lot of people around me, and me projecting out light. And then he asked 2 other questions. He asked, what would you have to embrace to realize that vision? And what would you have to release to realize that vision? And that's an exercise I do whenever I'm starting to feel disconnected or I feel stuck. With my coaching clients, some of the ones who don't like visualization because it doesn't work for everyone, the other thing I'll have them do is take out a set of colored pencils, crayons, markers, and I'll say, draw yourself happy and just show me what's there. That tends to work for people. The term happy is actually a lot harder for me than vision or purpose or meaning. So that might get tweaked because I don't think of happiness as an outcome or an endpoint or something that is achieved.
I really like that exercise. And usually I'll ask the guest to come up with a challenge or an invitation for the audience that could contribute to their lives. But that seems like a great one.
There's another one that I love, and it was taught to me by Erin Jones, who was formerly at a consulting firm called SR4 Partners. She had us draw. It was for one of my team offsites. So I am a facilitator. And for that reason, I always bring external facilitators into spaces for offsites and learning events for the team, because it's important that I can participate, and it's not always a sort of top-down relationship, but that we can all be part of something together. So she led this exercise, and she got out the sort of scented markers and gave us these big sheets of paper and said, draw your timeline of happiness. You have 30 minutes to draw the major moments in your life where you experienced real joy. And everybody drew something so extremely different. I actually drew a timeline. So it had the little line, and it was very linear, and it was dated, and I could see the things that really mattered to me. And one of the things that stuck out is when I make things, I'm happy. That was huge. There were people on it, but it was interesting to me because there were some folks who what they drew had no people in their life in it at all. Some people where it was just all stick figures. There were people where work wasn't on their timeline at all. And what I noticed about mine was there's so much variety on it. And I realized, yeah, that makes sense. Novelty, variety, being able to do many different things, that brings me joy. The facilitator drew a mountain and a scene of herself and her family by the mountain. And it was when I get to be in nature, doing outdoorsy activities with these people, that is joy. So this is actually me representing one trip we took, but it's a stand-in for all of the trips. And so looking at that exercise, I think provides a lot of information that you may not have picked up on or realized. And for me, it sounds so silly because if I go back to any kind of artifact from childhood or youth or even my early career, it's creativity, creativity, creativity. When I was 4 years old, I was asked what I wanted to do with my life, and I said, be an artist. Then I wanted to be a writer. I wanted to go to art school. I have a degree in graphic design. I have written a creative nonfiction thesis, but I constantly seem to forget that that's because those things make me happy. There's sort of this kind of programming in me that I've always been told I'm a good writer. So I just leaned into that because I wanted to achieve that. But even during this leave, I've been working on my second book, and I wrote 77 pages in 2 weeks with a crying baby on my lap the whole time. Like, he's been in my lap crying, and I've been typing. And I felt really good. And I realized even when it's painful, even when I'm struggling, even when I hate this sentence, or I don't like what I'm writing, or I wish I could be writing something else, it goes back to that timeline of happiness for me, which is, and even that visualization, I have ideas and I really want to share them with other people. And writing is the vehicle to do that.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me, and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Yeah, you too, Alida. Ciao.
Okay. Bye.
That concludes another episode of the 10,000 Heroes Show. Thanks again for listening, and I hope that this has contributed in some small way to your own personal journey of heroism. I'd like to give a shout out to Pierre for the episode artwork, DJ Plainview for the theme music, and to our producer-editor, Martine. This podcast is sponsored by Momentum Lab, our year-long coaching program providing insight, accountability, a community of excellence, and one-on-one support. I encourage anyone who's intrigued to go to whatismomentumlab.com and explore. Finally, I love communication. If this episode has impacted your life in any way, let me know. Our email is info@10kh.show, and there's other ways to contact us in the show notes. Thank you, have a wonderful day, and take care.